A tornado forecasting index that rarely climbs above 1 is forecast to hit 8 over the northeast this afternoon. That number belongs in Oklahoma in spring, not Quebec and northern Maine in July, and it's only the opening move. Over the next 10 days, one locked jet stream pattern is set to drive a rare tornado threat, a multi-day severe weather siege down the east coast, and a tropical system building in the Gulf. Let's get straight into what forecasters are watching day by day and why they keep using the word deadly. Here's what you need to understand before anything else. The threat aimed at the eastern United States right now is not a single storm. It's one pattern, one large reconfiguration of the jet stream that switched on over the last 24 hours and is now driving a chain of separate hazards, one after another, across roughly the next 10 days. Yesterday, the eastern half of the country was in a quiet stretch, weeks with no significant severe weather. Today, that stretch is over, and the reason it's over is a single change in the shape of the winds high above our heads. The setup is what meteorologists call a dipole. On one side, a massive dome of high pressure, a heat dome, has built across the Great Plains and the Northern Plains. On the other side, over the eastern part of the country, the jets stir here or the stakes up front. Over the next 10 days, this one pattern is forecast to produce a rare and potentially significant tornado threat over far northern New England today. A multi-day severe weather siege from the mid-Atlantic to the northeast this coming weekend, and a tropical system that the Gulf of Mexico is quietly trying to build from scratch. Record heat in the west and major flooding are riding along with all of it, 4 different families of hazard from one jet stream configuration in the same week. Start with the dome. That heat dome parked over the plains isn't just a heat story, though it's breaking records, and we'll get to that. Its more important job for everyone on the East Coast is what it do. Strong ridge of high pressure. The winds high in the atmosphere turn sharply out of the northwest and accelerate. Forecasters describe it as a high-speed conveyor belt, and that phrase is worth holding on to because it explains everything that follows. That northwest flow is the engine of this entire 10-day sequence. It's what drives cold, storm-generating disturbances down out of Canada and into the warm, humid, unstable air sitting over the northeast. It's what will steer this weekend's clusters of storms southeast toward the Interstate 95 corridor. And it's the same broad pattern whose trailing edge sags a stalling front down into the Gulf, where it gives a tropical system a chance to spin up. One conveyor belt, 3 different disasters, depending on where you stand. The dome is forecast to begin sliding east today, parking a lid of high pressure aloft from roughly Montana east to Michigan. As it moves, it drags that northwest flow regime with it, and it hands the first disturbance directly to New England. A storm system that had been tracking across Saskatchewan and Manitoba, producing tornadoes over the last couple of days, is now diving its energy southeast. That energy is what arrives over the northeast today. This is the part that has forecasters genuinely concerned, because it's happening somewhere it isn't supposed to happen. A strong disturbance in the jet stream is sweeping across the northeast today, and it's bringing wind shear that forecasters keep describing as unuse. Yearly strong for that part of the country, on the order of 50-plus knots of deep layer shear. Shear is the change in wind speed and direction as you go up through the atmosphere, and it's the ingredient that lets a thunderstorm start to rotate and become a supercell. You expect this much shear in the plains in the spring. You do not expect it over Maine in the middle of July. The setup favors discrete rotating supercells across far northern New England, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and upstate New York, and across southern Quebec and Ontario near Montreal, Ottawa, and Drummondville. And the hazards these storms can produce read Lee. Key A plains outbreak, not a New England summer afternoon. We're talking about large hail up to baseball size, roughly 2 3/4 inches across. We're talking about destructive straight-line winds with gusts that could exceed 75 to 80 miles per hour, hurricane force coming out of a thunderstorm. And we're talking about the risk of a few strong tornadoes rated EF2 or higher. There's a reason the atmosphere can do this today. As that front arrives, it drags cold air in at high altitude while the surface stays warm and humid. That difference, cold on top, warm underneath, steepens what forecasters call the lapse rate, and it makes the air violently unstable. One forecaster called it rocket fuel. When you overlay that instability on 50 knots of shear, you get exactly the kind of environment that produces significant, long-lived rotating storms in northern New England in July. To understand why that's so unusual, think about how thunderstorms normally behave in the Northeast in summer. Most of them are what forecasters call pulse storms. They pop up in the heat of the afternoon, drop some rain and maybe some small hail, and collapse within an hour because either isn't enough shear to organize them, they're messy and short-lived. What today has that a normal Northeast summer day doesn't is the organizing wind field. 50 knots of deep layer shear tilts a storm so that its rising air and its falling rain are separated, which lets the updraft survive for hours instead of minutes. A storm that survives for hours is a storm that can grow a rotating core, produce giant hail, and drop a tornado. That's the difference between a passing summer boomer and what forecasters are worried about this afternoon. This isn't completely without precedent for the region. In late July of 2021, a very similar northwest flow setup drove a line of storms across Pennsylvania that produced EF2 and even EF3 tornado damage. Same basic ingredients, a ridge to the west and fast northwest, winds aloft, steering organized storms into the northeast. So the pattern that's dangerous today is a known one. It's just rare enough that when the numbers line up the way they have today, forecasters take it very seriously. Here's the single number that made forecasters stop and look twice. There's a tool called the Significant Tornado Parameter, or STP. It's a composite index. It blends together the instability in the atmosphere, the deep layer shear, the low-level spin available to a storm, and how low the cloud bases are. It was built to flag and fire onments capable of producing significant tornadoes, the EF2 or stronger kind. A value of 1 is meaningful. A value of 1 means you should be paying attention. Forecast model guidance showed the significant tornado parameter reaching as high as 8 near Quebec around. D5 were this afternoon. 8. That's an exceptional value anywhere. It would be a headline number in classic tornado country, in Oklahoma or Kansas. At the latitude of Quebec and far northern Maine, it's close to unheard of. That single number is why this isn't being treated as an ordinary summer thunderstorm day, and it's why the Storm Prediction Center drew the outlook that it did. That outlook placed an enhanced risk level, 3 out of 5, across the threat area with slight and marginal risk zones surrounding it. Break that down into the specific odds, and it gets sharper. There's a 15% tornado probability with a hatched zone. That hatching is the key detail. It means the potential for significant EF2 plus tornadoes. There's a 0% damaging wind probability, also hatched, for gusts of 75 to 80 miles per hour and higher. And there's a 15% hail probability, hatched, for hail larger than 2 inches. Hatched. Every hazard carries the significant severity flag. That's what elevates today above a routine risk. Here's how forecasters expect it to unfold, because the timing matters if you're anywhere in the path. The first storms are possible this morning near Quebec and Drummondville, but the main event is an afternoon show. As the sun heats the surface and the disturbance arrives, supercells are expected to fire, and around 5, several rotating supercells could be on the map at once, which lines up exactly with that significant tornado parameter peak near Quebec. From there, the storms track southeast, riding the conveyor belt. They move through Maine, through Presque Isle, Clayton Lake, and Jackman, roughly between 6. 2h and 8 p.m. Eastern this evening, then into Berlin, New Hampshire, and on toward Bangor and Portland, roughly 9 to 10 hour. Overnight, as the daytime heating that was feeding them fades, they should begin to weaken as they approach Nashua and Boston. So the window of greatest danger for the significant rotating storm S is this afternoon and this evening across the far north. If you're in northern New England, this is a today problem, not a tomorrow problem, and it's worth knowing your plan before the afternoon. Here's the thing to keep in mind as those storms wind down tonight. This is only Act 1. The same conveyor belt that's firing supercells over Maine today doesn't switch off. It reloads because behind this first disturbance, the pattern is setting up to do it again, this time farther spillward. Friday is the Mid-Atlantic's turn. The Storm Prediction Center had drawn a severe risk covering Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, Raleigh, and Virginia Beach. Ahead of it, the air is being loaded like a spring. Heat indices near 100 from D.C. to Philadelphia, and Hajing, H's of 100 to 105 across central North Carolina in the days before. That warm, humid air is the fuel. When the northwest flow disturbances dive southeast into it, they organize into what meteorologists call mesoscale convective systems, large, long-lived complexes of storms. And the primary threat from them is Saint, rate-line damaging wind. Forecasters had already trimmed part of Friday's risk and said it could be reintroduced, which is honest uncertainty this far out, but the ingredients are there. Roughly 29 million people live inside that mid-Atlantic risk area, and Friday is only the first day of the siege. On Saturday, the European model favored a significant severe event shifting into the Midwest, Minneapolis, Iowa, and Wisconsin, with every hazard on the table, but wind again the main concern. On Sunday, a low-pressure system settling over the Great Lakes is expected to drive there, round through the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes, and back toward the East Coast, and this time tornadoes are on the table again. Sunday also opens a southern front. A slight risk was drawn for eastern Georgia and the Carolinas, roughly 13.7 million people, including Charleston and Columbia, with gusts over 60 miles per hour possible, and that threat is expected to slide into northern Florida by Monday. Then Monday brings yet another round possible up and down the East Coast, from Alabama all the way into New England, added up. Northern New England today, the Mid-Atlantic Friday, the Midwest Saturday, the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes and Southeast Sunday, the whole East Coast Monday. That's one pattern, methodically working the eastern half of the country for 10 straight days. And the wind is only half of the weekend's threat. The other half is water. Even away from the severe storms, the same pattern is wringing out heavy rain, training thunderstorms, storms that move repeatedly over the same ground, like train cars passing over the same stretch of track, have been threatening flash flooding over the Mississippi, Ohio, and Tennessee valleys, where their ground is already saturated. Rainfall rates in those storms can exceed 2 inches an hour. Farther southwest, the Weather Prediction Center forecasts 6 to 10 inches of rain for the Texas Hill Country, with flash flood chances running as high as 40%. That's a separate hazard from the tropics, and it's playing out right now on the wet edge of the same locked pattern. This is one system with many faces, and the flooding is one of those faces. It does not need a named storm to be dangerous. While all of that plays out overland, something is trying to organize over the water. This is where the pattern shows its real ambition. Remember that stalling front, the trailing edge of this whole system. It's forecast to sink into the Gulf of Mexico by roughly Friday and Saturday. And when a front stalls out over warm water in the middle of summer, the atmosphere here has a way of recycling it. Energy pinched off the tail end of that front could get cut off beneath the ridge, linger over the warm Gulf, and slowly begin to spin. Forecasters call this homegrown development, a tropical system built from scratch right there close to home, rather than one that tracks in from across the ocean. The odds have been climbing. Early estimates put the chance of a tropical depression forming around the weekend at roughly 20 to 30%. That rose to a 40 to 50% chance over a 15-day window across the northern Gulf, according to European ensemble guidance. The National Hurricane Center's 7-day outlook still showed no expected tropical development as of the overnight update, with a note that it could change within 24 to 48 hours. This is a rising risk, not a certainty. Forecasters even have the next name on the Atlantic list ready if it comes together, informally Bertha, but nothing has been designated. What makes this worth watching closely is that the European AI model flagged the setup first, ahead of the traditional operational models, and it's been persistent about it. It shows a weak low forming over the northeast Gulf and slowly deepening from around 1,010 millibars down toward the mid-1000s, and in one scenario down near 996 millibars off the Florida panhandle about 8 days out, becoming a landfalling tropical storm around the middle of next week and then meandering. That meandering is the flood signal. A slow system over warm water dumps enormous rain. But not every model agrees, and that disagreement is itself the story. Both the European AI ensemble and the 51-member European ensemble show a signal that's growing but SP, read out. Some members recurve the system into the Carolinas and Georgia. Some park it meandering along the Gulf Coast. Some race it up the eastern seaboard. A minority of members reach tropical storm or even hurricane strength PR. Heschers, but most keep it at depression to low-end tropical storm strength. That spread is, the model's honestly telling you the outcome genuinely hasn't been decided yet, because the atmosphere itself hasn't decided. Small differences now in exactly how that pinched-off energy behaves lead to very different endings a week from now. One thing worth naming directly, one low-probability model run took the Gulf system inland along a path that resembled a recent devastating storm. That's worth mentioning only with the PR obability attached, and the probability is low. A single deterministic model run is not a forecast, and treating one alarming solution as the answer is exactly the kind of overreach that leads people astray. The responsible way to read this is the ensemble way. Rising odds, widespread, real but uncertain. Here's the fork that decides how this ends, and it's genuinely undecided as of today. That trough of northern stream energy diving down over the eastern United States this weekend, the same trough, driving the northeast severe threat, could sweep south far enough to scoop up the developing Gulf system. If it does, it combines with that low and gives whatever is there a boost in intensity. Meteorologists call this baroclinic enhancement, and it's why some model runs strengthen the system as it moves north over or near land instead of weakening it the W, you'd normally expect. So, the two halves of this story aren't separate after all. The same conveyor belt dropping baseball-size hail on Maine today could, by the end of next week, be reaching down to grab a Gulf low and drive it toward the eastern United States with extra strength. That's one plausible path. The other path is that the energy never consolidates over the water. The GFS AI model showed exactly that, energy hanging over the southeast that might not become a Gulf system at all. In that scenario, the tropical threat collapses, and what's left is a pure flooding event. Either way, the water is coming. Regardless of whether anything gets named, there's significant flooding potential from New Orleans east to Tampa, with Florida flagged as potentially the hardest hit. The 10-day rainfall outlook shows above normal totals across the northern Gulf and much of the eastern United States. The tropical piece is a coin flip. The rain is not. Watch the National Hurricane Center's next few outlooks. If they issue an area of interest, the odds have tipped. Now, step back and look at the western half of this dipole, because it isn't a side story, it's the power source. That dome of high pressure over the Intermountain West and the northern plains has been running historically hot. We're talking highs of 100 to 110 degrees locally higher, with all-time records challenged. Salt Lake City pushed near its all-time high of about 107 degrees. Billings, Montana, approached 108. At the peak around this past weekend, some areas were running as much as 25 degrees above normal. Take a second to appreciate how extreme those western numbers are, because they tell you how strong the engine is. When a city like Salt Lake City challenges its all-time high, not its record for the date, but the hottest temperature ever measured there in any month of any year, that's not a routine hot spell. It takes a genuinely powerful, deeply built ridge to push temperatures 25 degrees above normal across that much territory at once. And the strength of that ridge is directly proportional to the speed of the conveyor belt on its eastern side. A stronger dome means faster northwest winds, oft, which means more shear and better organization for the storms downstream. So the same record heat that's dangerous in its own right in the west is, at the same time, the reason the severe threat in the east is as sharp as it is. They're not two stories, they're one number read from two ends. Here's why that matters for someone standing in Philadelphia or Portland, Maine. That western dome is the western anchor of the entire pattern. Its eastern flank is the northwest flow conveyor belt. The same high-pressure baking Salt Lake City is the reason the winds are aligned. Had to fire supercells over Maine and drive storm complexes into the mid-Atlantic. You cannot separate them. The heat in the west and the severe weather in the east are two faces of one wave. That's the through line for the whole 10 days. One jet stream configuration, many hazards, and the dome is what holds it all in place long enough to matter. Let's address the claim that circulates online whenever this many hazards cluster in 1 week, that the weather is being engineered or steered, that so-called weather modification technology is manufacturing the outbreak or even building the Jizumharai Wolf system on demand. Here's the physics straight because it doesn't hold up. A single supercell releases energy comparable to a large nuclear device. No technology anyone has deployed creates a 50-knot shear environment across a region, builds a continental-scale heat dome, or carves the jet stream into a ridge. And trough dipole. Cloud seeding can nudge precipitation in a cloud that already exists under narrow conditions. It cannot conjure a tornado outbreak over Quebec. The sense that 4 hazards happening at once must be coordinated is a trick your brain plays, called apophenia, seeing a plan in events that only look connected. In this case, they are connected, but the connection is meteorological, not a conspiracy. One jet stream wave, many faces. That's the whole explanation, and it's enough. So here's where things stand and what to watch. Today, the immediate danger is the far northern New England and Quebec's severe threat. Significant tornadoes, baseball hail, and hurricane-force wind gusts across Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont this afternoon and evening. If you're up there, that's your next several hours. Know where you'll shelter before the storms arrive. Looking ahead, the first big test is whether today's outbreak verifies at its significant ceiling and whether the Storm Prediction Center restores the Friday Mid-Atlantic risk it trimmed. Then comes the weekend siege, Friday through Monday, walking down the East Coast. And hanging over all of it, is the single biggest question. Does the weekend trough scoop up the Gulf's homegrown spin and drive the season's first named Gulf storm toward the eastern United States? Or does it all come apart over land and leave a flood instead? That fork should resolve within the next roughly 7 to 10 days. The concrete thing to watch is the National Hurricane Center's tropical outlooks. One more practical note before we close this out, because a pattern with this many moving pieces deserves a plain language safety rundown, not just the meteorology. If you're anywhere in the path of today's northern New England threat, know your shelter plan before the afternoon heat builds. A sturdy building, lowest floor, away from windows, a mobile home or a vehicle, is not adequate shelter from an EF2 or stronger tornado. If you're in the mid-Atlantic or northeast heading into the weekend siege, treat the damaging wind threat with the same seriousness as a tornado warning. Straight-line winds at 75 to 80 miles per hour can do the same kind of damage to trees, power lines, and structure as that a weak tornado can. If you're along the Gulf Coast or anywhere from New Orleans to Tampa, the flooding risk is real regardless of whether a named storm ever forms. So this is a good week to check that storm drains near your property are clear, and that you know your evacuation route if you're in a flood-prone area. And if you're out west under that record heat dome, the basics still save lives. Hydration, checking on elderly neighbors and relatives, and never leaving people or pets in parked vehicles. One pattern started all of this, and one pattern is carrying it forward. The quiet stretch is over. We'll be tracking every act of this as it develops, so stay ready, because the next 10 days on the East Coast are going to be anything but ordinary.